Welcome to Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willies, your host. We are going to have a great show for you today. Hello, how are you doing, El Señor Daniel?
Estoy bien. ¿Y tú? How are you doing, sir?
Okay. How's it going, my friend?
It's going well. You know, we are hurtling toward November at this point. So, a little bit less than a month out from November elections. And I'm feeling frisky. It's 6 a.m. Let's do this thing, you know?
We're going to do it. But before we get started, I need to go ahead and tell the great geniuses in the studio. Good morning, El Señor Howard, and good morning, El Señor Jack.
Well, good morning, Egberto. How are you this morning?
Oh, I'm doing fine. I don't know if you noticed, but you know, when your hands touch a volume button, you can think that something is happening because you can't hear a darn thing. You're about to go on the air and it's like, oh, there's a short panic that sets in. But just knowing that there are two great guys in the studio, you know that you're covered. How you guys doing today?
We were going to take over your show and play smooth jazz. Harry would be happy. But you came on through, so your tin cans of string held up. So here we are. And I did want to talk about our brand new lineup on KPFT. Rourke departed on us on Friday. So, well, he's still alive, of course. He didn't depart the earth. He just departed KPFT, which leaves us with a brand new lineup for the week. They moved Susan to 3 to 6 for Border Radio. And they put in Marcus Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday and Thursday, Clint Broussard is going to step up with Blues and Hi-Fi, which is really a pretty good show. And I think he'll do very, very well. Then Friday, it all comes off the rails. The train wrecks. I'm going to take over Friday morning, 9:30 till noon. And we're going to take in a lot of requests, too. They've been announcing that it's an all-request show, but we're going to work in some of my requests, too. So I guess it would be an all-request show. That's this coming week on KPFT. And, Jack, you got some wisdom for us this morning?
Yes. Good morning, Egberto.
Buenos dias, Jack. How are you doing this morning, my brother?
I'm good. It's going to be...
Talk to me.
May you be the wisest hobo in the hooch.
All righty then.
Wait, is that it?
That's it.
You mean you got a one-liner today?
Just a one-liner.
Oh, man, you're going to have to make that up.
I'm probably going to
have to make that up for sure.
I'm going to probably end up being a hobo, maybe a hobo with means. So I want to be the wisest hobo in the hooch.
Right. Jack and I are going to live under the bridge over here.
Yeah, well, anyway, folks, we have got a great show for you today. Today's topics, first of all, the title of the show today is Cohen's Progressive Voter Guide. Medicare Advantage scam, Liz Cheney warns about Jim Jordan. But look, as usual, folks, those are the topics I chose for today. But remember, this is your show. Most of the times we get to one topic. If we're lucky, we get to 2. If we're lucky, we get to 3 because it's your show. You call in and change to whatever you want. Please do remember, let me first give the setup. Subtitle, Daniel J. Cohen boldly releases his progressive voter guide for the Houston area. Liz Cheney did not mince her words about the impact electing Jim Jordan, what it would have on the GOP. And Thom Hartmann calls out Medicare Advantage. Yes, Tom and I go back and forth with Medicare Advantage, trying to get folks to understand the scam. Folks, remember, you can reach us several ways. Go ahead and get us at KPFT 90.1 on the dials. That's 90.1 FM. Alternatively, you can go ahead and stream us from your TuneIn application on your Android or Apple phone. Download that TuneIn application at the Apple Store or at the Google Store, also known as a Play Store. You can stream us live at kpft.org/listen, or just go to kpft.org and click listen. While you're at the website, don't forget you can hit that donate button and support KPFT via Politics Done Right by just going ahead and select that donate. Scroll down, say, I'm doing it for Politics Done Right. I'm not getting any pennies at all. I don't get any money. It all goes to the studio. They just tag it as, well, it came through Politics Done Right. Go and see us live at facebook.com/KPFT Houston. Facebook.com/KPFT Houston. You'll also be able to see the handsome face of Daniel Cohen as he gives us his data. We also have, of course, on YouTube, you can go to politicsdoneright.tv, watch the show live at YouTube or on YouTube. The podcast, folks, at politicsdoneright.com/podcast to see the different clips that we have and quite a bit more. You can also go to politicsdoneright.com/newsletter, politicsdoneright.com/newsletter to see the subjects we didn't cover. Just come up to the blog and everything that I didn't cover, the clips and everything will be right there. Of course, it's a call-in show, 713-526-5738. 713-526-5738. Extension number 2 gets you speaking right away. Anyhow, our special guest today is the one and only President of Indivisible Houston, and that is Daniel Cohen, who also has a new newsletter on Substack. Tell us, first of all, about your newsletter and how people can get your newsletter so that they can be informed about local and national politics.
Oh, sure. Thank you. It's danieljcohen.substack.com. It's called Disruption and Democracy. And I offer you left takes as one of the most active pro-democracy activists in the post-Trump era in the city of Houston. But the takes are going to cover local, state, and national themes, and sometimes international themes so that we can connect the dots and connect the threads between those different things. So I'm hoping to give you some information, insights, perspectives, and strategy and tactics for democracy. Again, that's danieljcohen.substack.com.
Yeah, very important. I've been trying to, as far as independent media, independent voices, Daniel, it is important for us to reach sources. You take a look at how the news is covered right now, and the types of slants that you get is always a corporate slant, or the kind of things you can't talk about has a corporate direction. So we really, right now, we still have the ability to have independent voices speaking so that to give people a place. So I want as much as possible for us to make sure that we are all heard, and having a voice like yours with your new Substack newsletter. I know you're writing for some other folks as well, but having your own news that you can, write unlimitedly and timely is, I think, very important. Now, Daniel, I was perusing my Twitter, and then I noticed that you wrote an article, and this article was actually called, and I'm searching for it as I pull it up here, was called Progressive Voting Guide for the 2023 Houston City Council Elections. Let me tell you why that turned me on and why I said I wanted to bring you on to talk about that. With all the election that is the very important election that is occurring in Houston in November, I don't hear much about it. And what I see is that people, and Joe, I'm coming to you in a little bit. I just want to get started up here with Daniel. I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. And we are a bellwether county. We are a bellwether city. Our elections, just like when Chicago was running several candidates, it was national news. Everybody knew the candidates. Everybody knew the different policies that they were talking about, etc. Here in Houston, the fourth largest city, and peeps, nothing. No national mention, nothing. Why is that?
There are a lot of reasons. So one reason is that, as you said, you mentioned that a lot of the media slants corporate, but it's also that the election structurally slants in a corporate direction. So, for example, we're having our November election for control of the city of Houston in 2023. Most elections are happening in even numbered years during November. And so you start talking about all of it as one lump of the different things. You would think one would overshadow the other, but it doesn't really work that way. Just as when you have two restaurants on a row, both restaurants do better. When you have multiple elections happening at the same time, you have better voter turnout for multiple elections. But the Houston city election, generally speaking, overrepresents, and it skews older, it skews whiter than the city, and it skews wealthier than the city. So we don't really get the word out. It's kind of unclear in a lot of cases. In fact, to some extent, who is even eligible. There are people who are in unincorporated Harris County who can't vote. There are other people who are in the city of Houston, but they're not in Houston proper, so they can't vote. So you don't have that extra fringe of Harris County and the surrounding areas necessarily included. You do in some cases, for example, as you well know, in Kingwood, folks can vote. But then when you start getting out to the heavy majority of, say, Fort Bend, they can't, right? Which I guess is the case with Harris County as well. But if you get out to like Cy Fair or Tomball, you can't vote. So you don't have as much chatter around the edges of the city as well. And then in addition to that, it's just local politics, I think, makes less of a horse race for people. And that perpetuates this cycle where the news doesn't cover it and the people don't pay attention to it. It's very easy to play clips over and over again of, say, Trump or even a congressperson. But it's, Houston City Council, somebody sitting around the dais for a local area. It's just a little bit, it drives a few less clicks, I think, for people. And people don't know how Houston City Council works. They weren't taught that in school. So there is some of that. But to your point, I mean, it's a huge city. It's a huge pulpit. It's going to be hugely impactful. The mayor of Houston has a ton of power, and we just don't even discuss it.
Yeah, that is shameful. Now, let's hold our horses here for a second before we continue this and bring Joe into the conversation, and then we'll take it from there. Joe, come on in.
Hey, good morning, Egberto.
Good morning. How are you doing, sir?
I'm not too bad, man. How about yourself?
Great. Talk to me.
Well, a couple things about the local race. It seems to me that Houston is really just such a Democrat machine city that really the results are just predictable. If you check all the right boxes, well, you're there. If you're black, gay, pro migration person, you've checked all the boxes and you're pretty much guaranteed a seat. Houston politics to me it's machine politics, but to me. You mentioned something about Liz Cheney, right? And that's intriguing to me because, she's a darling among Democrats now because, she's speaking out against, MAGA Republicans. And, it's funny to see that, Democrats aligning themselves with the Cheney family. If Cheney's, have we forgotten that guy's like one of the most notorious war criminals in history, Dick Cheney, right? He's the architect of all of that mass murder after 9/11 when we went looking for WMDs in Iraq and propping up the huge defense industry in this country, which is something we're doing again now, right? So if you're going to talk about Liz Cheney, let's just put color everything she says with that kind of lens. Remember where she's coming from, right? She's her father's daughter, and she is very much, I think, evil.
Okay, anyway, I don't think she's
here.
evil. I agree with. Let me just say, I agree with you that Democrats need to put it into context who she really is. But that phrase that says the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And in this case, there's one good thing that as far as people who believe in democracy and believe that Trump is a clear and present danger to the society, they take the help wherever they can get it. And Liz Cheney was very helpful in giving some credibility. Not for Democrats or independents, but giving credibility to some Republicans that going after Donald Trump for the insurrectionist and coup plotter that he was, that it was justified to go after him, given
Wait
that
a second, man.
Go ahead.
Coup
Sure,
plotter,
go ahead. Please, go ahead.
Coup plotter, insurrectionist. Dude.
Yes.
If you can't see that 2020 election was a sham, then you should open your eyes, man. Open your eyes, and don't perpetuate the lies.
So, Joe, let me ask you one question, and then I will ask and let's actually continue civil. I really enjoyed that the way you started was very civil, so that we could actually listen to what each other actually had to say. And if you notice, I also listened to what you had to say. So let's kind of keep it there.
Just pause for a second.
Again.
But what you said was offensive to me because you said people who love democracy and people who recognize Donald Trump as an existential threat. It's as if those are two separate those things are the same, right? Well, Donald Trump is preferred by the majority of Americans. And it's not because it's some game show host. It's because he wants to destroy the cancer that's eating away at the body. Or so
okay, Joe, let me ask you something, because I want to show you. I want to say something that you said, right? And by the way, keep Joe live for me, Jack, because I really want to touch on something Jack said. I mean, that something Joe said. Joe, here's the thing. I made some comments, and you told me that it was offensive to you, and you started to interrupt me as I was replying. But you made a whole lot of comments when you started the discussion that to a lot of Democrats would have seemed offensive. First of all, the mere fact, the way you said Democrat as a noun, that sort of a thing kind of told me where you were early on. And I sat down and I listened to you to really understand where you're coming from. I ask you to do the same for me. Now, there are many of us who look at Trump as an existential problem for democracy. You don't. I do. I am pretty sure Daniel does as well. Okay. You don't see it that way, but we do. We can enumerate things that he does, but I don't have the time to go into that particular issue right now. I think you called in to make a valid point, and that is, please remember who Liz Cheney is and where she comes from. That was a valid point. Now, again, Donald Trump, when you mentioned that Donald Trump is cared for, or most people in America prefer Donald Trump, I can't find a poll at all that says that. I can't find a reality at all that says that. You may have some poll that says that. We have not yet seen that, but that's not the case. When it comes to the election, I guess if you believe that 61 or 66 judges who said there was no election fraud, if there were 66 judges, federal judges that said that, we'd have to disbelieve all of that. Likewise, if you take a look at the amount of votes that came in that voted against Trump, I don't know where you're coming with what you have to say, but go ahead, Joe, before we move on.
Well, the bus is here, so I got to go hop on the bus. But we could go on all day, but I don't think 61 or 66 federal judges said that there was no election fraud. I believe what they said is that the proof of election fraud that's being presented to them has no standing, or they have no standing, or there was a problem with the evidence, but the evidence doesn't make it into court, right? Because of one technical reason or another, right?
Before you go, since you have to jump on the bus,
I'll be listening, Egberto. Have a beautiful day, man. Right. Sorry I had to cut it short.
You too.
We'll talk to you soon.
You too, Joe. We'll talk. We'll talk another time, Joe. You take care. Now, Daniel, Joe is not a bad person, and you can talk to Joe if you come to Joe with a part. But Joe, I think the problem, and before we go back to our subject, I think you remember earlier before the show started, we were talking about the propaganda engine that was getting placed together with the meeting with Fuentes and these other folks, etc. When you have a group of people who follow those guys, we get brothers and sisters like Joe, who they genuinely believe what they're saying, because their source of information makes them believe what they believe. One of the reasons I state that we need a Daniel Cohen's newsletter and other forms of information is to counteract that. What's your thoughts?
I think that's absolutely true. There are a few things, though, that Egberto, I got to touch on a couple of the things here.
Sure, go ahead. Please do.
Joe, I hope that this shines through. I have to say that, when you said that the 66 judges didn't say there's provable fraud, that's because 66 different times people had the opportunity to make a case, and 66 times none of it ever came through, which pretty well demonstrates that there wasn't strong enough evidence to be able to make those claims. He mentioned that a majority of Americans prefer Trump. In the 2020 election, 7 million was the popular margin between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. So it was, unless you believe that there's a 7 million person vote fraud that flipped, or if you believe, for example, that Dominion voting machines, which, by the way, were used in Texas, were only, used to tilt the election in certain places, which numerous studies have shown that wasn't the case. There were numerous people surrounding Trump, like Attorney A.G. Barr, who specifically said that there was no election fraud. They tried to smear him by saying he was connected to Dominion. It was Dominion Energy in the end instead of the Dominion voting machines, which are two different companies. I mean, I just hope that Joe does watch some of the alternative arguments to what he says, because I have the awful impression that he hasn't actually given the dissent to his arguments the time of day. So that's my impression. Just large. The record had to be corrected very quickly. I do think that one thing that he made, the only thing here that I can say he made a reasonable point about, which I think you addressed directly, was it is true that Liz Cheney is popular. She's the kind of person who can be sanitized, in that they will put Liz Cheney on the news before they put you on the news, before they put me on the news. But they do love to put people like Joe on the news. You will find that they love to talk to your rank and file street level Trump voter before they will talk to somebody who challenges the Democratic machine from the left, or say, and I'm not talking about like a Jimmy Dore, flamethrower type, but somebody who just speaks lucidly about these issues. And I wish that we had more lucid analysis of these issues. I wish that they'll never put someone who takes a hardcore class and race analysis to the corporate news machine on the news, because that would disrupt the whole game. That's why every newspaper in America has a business section, has a real estate section, which is just a business section for property, has a restaurant section, which is a business section for food, it has a sports section, which is a business section for the athletic empire, and so on and so forth. Every section of your newspaper, broadly speaking, is the business section in a different format. There is no labor section of your newspaper in the United States of America. And there's a reason for that. So I totally agree with you, Egberto, the standard line of the news. And it's not that I think that the media or individual journalists are bought or sold or anything like that. It's just that there is a lens to these things. Today we're talking about the Houston city elections. And I noticed that in a standard news article covering the Houston city elections, they referred to John Whitmire as a tough on crime Democrat. Except that tough on crime is not an objective label. That's what John Whitmire and his supporters call John Whitmire. They're the ones propagandizing that label. There's no reason for an objective journalist to pick that up and use it as a label in their story. So, Joe, at the end of the day, there's even room for agreement between you and me. But a lot of what you said, I think you got to do more research, my friend. And I want to cover some of what I want to cover some of what was said about the municipal elections too. But let me hop off the soapbox here for.
No. I think what you just said was important. And before I just want to remind Joe that there are several people were convicted of voter fraud in that election. They were all voter fraud supporting Donald Trump. That's number one. Number two, likewise, whenever we took a look at all instances, it never turned out. Again, you would have to believe, as you said, that machines, and there's this huge conspiracy that nobody could find. So, you have to open up your sources. Anyway, talk to me let's move on to the election. Johnny, I'm coming to you in a second with the election.
So briefly, we'll talk. Joe mentioned he thinks that the outcome of these elections are predetermined. I think that's a dangerous narrative, not just for the general nature of democracy, but even for Joe's own voter base, for what he wants to push forward in the world and what he believes. Generally speaking, he said, the election outcome's predetermined if you're pro-black, pro-gay, and pro-migration. I don't know. I didn't know that the Republican Party was quite mask off enough to say that they were anti any of those things explicitly. Usually there's a more in-depth kind of discussion of that. But the other thing I'll say is this. One, there are several conservatives on Houston City Council. Two, we have a highly contested mayoral race, and John Whitmire is playing footsie with a lot of Republicans in this race. So, and three, those issues that were mentioned, generally speaking, are not the focus of any of these elections. If you wanted to point to the issues that most Houston City Council incumbents believe in, they will do anything to protect the police department, even when the police department is wrong and engaging in crooked behavior. They want to focus on potholes all day long. They love talking about potholes, and they love talking about streets and street construction. Those are the three issues you hear over and over again. And basically, if you can get to everybody's, if you can be the person who represents those issues, then you're probably going to win your election. Those are the things. And the reason that we don't hear about these other issues is we have such voter turnout in the city of Houston. So we don't get to hear about anything else. We have a housing crisis right now. We have food insecurity and food deserts across the city of Houston. We have major transit issues that we could be talking about, but we don't. We talk about cops, potholes, and streets. It's cops and concrete and oil that run the city. If we want to break that, then we need people to start voting and getting involved in talking about those things. I don't think I've heard a reference to immigration once in this entire discussion. And to the extent that Democrats are talking about immigration, they seem to be moving to the right. In fact, I'm criticizing the Democratic Party, in their position, and far more out of step with the current Democratic Party. Probably, I hate to say this, but then Joe is this week. I mean, you had the president coming out for a wall. And you have Democrats running in rank and file. You've got the number 2 to Eric Adams up in New York saying close the border. And then you've got, major immigration critique going on in Chicago. And Houston, though, I don't even hear about it. Nobody talks about migration in the city of Houston. They're talking about cops, they're talking about potholes, and they're talking about streets. And you can go and look at every website. Don't listen to me. Go to ericmanning.us. Go to each individual candidate's website for the Houston city elections and look for yourself and see how many of them are talking about the issues I just mentioned versus the issues that Joe just mentioned. And you'll notice that's what they're all talking about. That's even the incumbents are talking about that. They talk about public safety and the cops and potholes and streets. Anyway, I'll get off it, but that's the mainstream line because developers and oil men and the police are big business in Houston.
All right, let's go ahead and run down your list real quickly on what you think the progressives need to know. Proposition A.
Yeah, so Prop A is going to allow any 3 city council members to bring an item to city council. Right now, the mayor can essentially shut down the agenda at any given time because it's a strong mayor system. 3 is a little bit low, to tell you the truth, for my taste, because I think that 3 out of 16 people sitting around the dais is not exactly a popular democracy, but, it is just bringing it up for discussion. We are going to see some fringe things happen, like 3 people might say, abolish the health department. But at the same time, we have such a strong mayor system that nobody can make enough noise that they need to make. Or let me take that back. It's hard for people to make enough noise, as much noise as they need to make about issues that are popular issues for Houstonians. So I say vote in favor of Prop A. Don't let the good be the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Excellent. And Prop B.
Prop B is an easy call. We're part of this group called the Houston-Galveston Area Council. We have less votes than anybody else on the council. Houston and Harris County get less votes than the surrounding counties with smaller populations. This is very much a nonpartisan vote. We get less funding than we should for Houston and Harris County, even though we give more money into the pie because we were volunteered as a county and as a city for this collective back in the 60s and nobody's ever fixed it. So this amends the city charter to make sure that we get our fair share of money and services. So we get out what we put in. Vote in favor of Prop B. There's very few people who are against Prop B.
No, I think we represent like 60% of that consortium, right? And I think we only get like 20% of the money because what is it, a 5-county thing?
I think it's more. I think there's a bunch of counties and municipalities in there because it's cities and counties. Like you get all due respect to the people of Liberty County, and I think they should get their funding. And I think, frankly, Greg Abbott has left them out in the cold, and so has the federal government on some of their projects. But in terms of a collective with us, if we're putting in that much money, we got people in Houston. Like I said, we've got a massive eviction crisis and food deserts. That money should flow back.
Absolutely. We'll talk about candidates in a minute, but let's go ahead and bring Johnny into the conversation, and then we'll do that. Come on, Johnny.
Hey, Joe. Where you going with your wife in your hand? Dun, 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 dun. I think Joe's wife is still calling him, and he's pretending he's got to get to work. So I think your guest is 100% on target, especially with his observation about newspapers. Every section of the newspaper, I would say more accurately, is not about labor. It's always about those with the bucks, the people at the very tippy top. excellent observation. That's why I hate local newspapers. That's a crime, though, when you think about it. Yeah, and language is really revealing. When people say Democrat Party, that really irritates me. So there are like 16, 17, 18 Texas constitutional amendments in next month's election. And at least 4 or 5 of them are ridiculous, over the top. And I don't have my list in front of me, so I can't comment on them with any degree of accuracy, since I don't know where I put that list. But what was I calling now? Something to do with it. Oh, that's right. Joe said, Joe, in case you're listening, buddy, you know what projection is, right? When Republicans project onto Democrats and libs and progressives what they are guilty of doing and or being. There was plenty of irregularities in this past election, and every election really, but the irregularities were not being committed by the Democrats, unfortunately. They were being committed by the Republicans, like Brian, what's-his-face, in Georgia. You know, the one who's holding the governorship right now, unlawfully, I would say.
Yeah, Brian Kemp.
Brian Kemp, he used his office at that time as, was he the voter registrar or the Secretary of State?
He was actually the Secretary of State, and then at the same time he ran, because they ran the election, and at the same time he was running. So he ran the election in which he was major
conflict of interest, Joe. Well, are you not thinking about that, or did you forget maybe? I don't know. But that's just one example of dozens of examples that Republicans engage in. The Democrats, they don't play hardball. The only time they play hardball is with their own people who run for office, who don't want to take corporate dark and PAC money. I've said this, I feel like a broken record, over and over and over again. Cenk Uygur, Nina Turner, and back in the day, Ralph Nader. That's when they play hardball instead of putting a check on the Republicans. Right. It's the Republicans who are doing the irregularities.
Johnny, I also want to remind Joe of one thing that I forgot to mention when Daniel was responding, and that is when we talk about voter fraud, Dan Patrick, our lieutenant governor, put up $25 million asking folks to find voter fraud. And they did find voter fraud, but the person who found voter fraud was the lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania, Fetterman. Fetterman found voter fraud, I think, in 4 or 5 different instances. Each of the voter fraud was committed by Republicans trying to give extra votes to Donald Trump. But it gets a bit worse than that, because not only did that occur, but Patrick did not pay Fetterman the monies for finding the voter fraud. I don't know what excuse he used, but a third person came and found voter fraud themselves, and Patrick did have to pay that person for that voter fraud that he found. And what was it again? Voter fraud on the Republican side. I'm pretty sure that wasn't reported. It wasn't reported in the media that Joe's trusts. But what I'm happy about, Joe, is Joe, first of all, and this is a message directed to one of our listeners. Thank you for listening to Politics Done Right. I hope we develop the trust in you so that in the long run, you'd eventually stop listening to the people who are misleading you and making you unnecessarily angry at the wrong people. I guarantee if you stick with Politics Done Right and good guys like Johnny and Daniel Cohen, and remember, check out Daniel Cohen's newsletter. That's going to be given quite a bit of information. Anyway, Johnny, I got to go continue the show. Give me a one sentence, and please don't be like our brother Harry. One sentence to close out.
No, I won't do that. I wouldn't do that to you. I would simply say I also liked your guest's comments about barking up the wrong tree. Well, you just said that, barking up the wrong tree. We teach you the right tree to bark up, and keep in mind that when people vote, they're voting in good faith. People don't think about voting for someone else in place of someone else. Right. It's just not worth it. Think about it. Unless you're a Republican, then you do it for free.
Thank you very much, John. You have a good day. All right. Now let's start going into some of the races. I noticed that talk about the districts that you ranked.
So to let everybody know out there, I only ranked I only talked about the districts where I'm voting, and I only really have a strong opinion about any district outside of that. Well, basically, one district that's outside of that, but we'll go through the voting list and see if we get to that. So I started with my own district, District J over here. West Side, Sharpstown, Gulfton, this area of town, west of the Galleria. It's a very clear race. It's straight up or down. The current incumbent, Edward Pollard, goes to Republican clubs, calls himself an independent conservative, and has Mr. Pollard seems to run toward whatever is popular in the moment, and generally speaking, runs toward like a kind of what he would say is, moderate ideology. As a Democratic precinct chair, I'm supporting Ivan Sanchez, who's a Democrat in the race. And I think that Ivan is willing to listen on issues. There are some things that we might disagree on, but I can talk to him about it. And I think that he's done some good civic work in the past. He did walk the vote at University of Houston downtown, things like that, got a lot of people to turn out. And has done a lot of service work as well, cleaning up bayous, things like that. So some similarities, but some stark enough differences in that race. It makes a clear choice. But that's the only race actually that's a straight up and down like Democratic and Republican race actually, and pretty much in the whole ballot, or at least as close as it comes to that. I covered the at-large city council races. In at-large one, there's a couple of decent candidates, Leah Wolfthal as well as Conchita Reyes. I lean toward Leah Wolfthal. It also features Melanie Miles. If anybody wants to, my trouble with Melanie Miles is essentially she is what you want her to be, depending on which voter you are.
She was Republican, right?
Ran as Melanie Flowers for judge as a Republican, and now she's running as Melanie Miles for city council as a Democrat. And she actually has a good chance of winning the race, but I think it's this is the kind of thing that people should really pay attention to. Because she basically is out there saying that she voted in the Republican primary as late as 2018. She switched over by 2020. But the thing is, if you were horrified by the Trump administration and Trump rhetoric, there really was nothing that you needed to see from the time he ran starting in 2015 to the end of 2018. Like, that was enough information that if you were turned off by that ideology, then you would have switched far before that. So I think it's an opportunistic switch. I think that we need people in office who are at least going to shoot straight with us on most of the issues. I think, to say that politicians are not generally opportunists, okay, that's fair. But it's a pretty egregious example of opportunism when you claim that you just can't, be with the Trumps anymore, when really the county changed, and she knows that it's harder for her to get elected if she's like a Trump Republican than if she's someone who says that she switched parties. So I think she switched parties for political opportunism, and I think that that's worth noting. And I would urge people to look at other candidates for at-large one, like Leah Wolfthal, who has a long record of activism and organizing. And like I said before, I give Conchita credit, especially for democracy issues. As well, but I lean toward Leah Wolfthal for at-large.
No, I saw all three of them speak, and what I liked about Leah is Leah apparently did the grassroots work with the organizations that she worked on, and Conchita. I also saw Conchita at an organization. I wasn't sure what is Conchita's claim to fame.
Well, I think she's done some community work and volunteering around as well. She was I think she had been in Spring for a while, and I think she'd been doing work out there. The Chronicle ran a piece actually that, where they went over everybody's residence, and that was one of the ones that they kind of questioned. But to tell you the truth, when I read that piece, all it did was reinforce to me, this is just my opinion, I didn't buy the argument that she was outside of the city. I think that she's been inside the city. Maybe it's been 2 or 3 years as opposed to, 30 years or something like that in terms of her in the city residence. But I bought her explanation, and there were 6 or 7 others that I didn't. But I did buy her explanation. So I think it's been a little bit more under the radar, and I think it's been Houston area as opposed to at 100% inside of city of Houston. But from where I'm sitting, for what it's worth, I'm fine with that. That's okay. As far as I'm concerned, you'll notice that Leah and Conchita both have quite a few of endorsements from former and sitting politicians. candidates and things like that. So I don't think it's a matter of, but I don't think it's a matter of anybody being propped up in this case. I think it's a matter of, there are people they've done community work in the past. Leah's just had more, I think, official positions in that capacity. Okay. And like I said, I support her. I mean, I'm, to be very clear, that's who I'm voting for in the race.
Yeah. But now at large too?
I'm going with Obs Nwabara because Obs is the only candidate in the race who has shown up consistently for grassroots causes and specifically grassroots democracy causes. And and he's been doing that now for several years. He ran for Harris County Department of Education on a precinct chair election, didn't win, made it to the runoff out of 3 amongst the precinct chairs, didn't win the race. But he is a dependable sort of Sanders progressive city council candidate, which is rare. We don't have a whole lot of them. There are several other candidates in that race. They are all fighting over a piece of sort of establishment pie, if you'll call it that, from different angles. You'll see that. So Holly Flynn Villaseca, Nick Hellier, and a few other people who are in that race as well.
What Ob's chances?
It's hard to say. So let me back up and say, first of all, I don't predict elections in general anymore because who the heck knows? It's turned into a cottage industry. And it's even harder when it comes to a city of Houston election because it's not like there's polling for at-large 2 in the city of Houston. But I would say, look, he's running against well-funded people who are backed up by large machines. So it's hard to, right? That's a hard race. I would say that on paper, he's got an uphill fight, but he knew that from the beginning, and he's run a respectable race, and he's raised some decent money, not the kinds of 6-figure sums that the people he's running against have raised, but some 5-figure quarters and things like that. So we'll see. I mean, sometimes
at large 3.
At large 3, I lean toward Donnell Cooper and Richard Cantu. I do want to give a quick shout out, actually, to Ethan Michelle Gans, first non-binary candidate in the city of Houston. But beyond that, an actual lefty who challenges the system in general and takes positions that challenge the system. So if somebody, given the number of people who are in that race, it's going to go to a runoff. If somebody wanted to vote for Ethan in the first round, I would support that just to elevate some of those issues, like really questioning where some of our police budget is going, which is completely in the shadows. It's not transparent at all. But I lean toward Donnell or Richard. Donnell challenged the sort of Houston Police Officers Union a little bit in terms of where their ideology is, and did a good job of pointing out how the police unions are not in complete agreement with one another, that the African American Police Officers Union and the Houston Police Officers Union actually don't see entirely eye to eye on things. And I respected the fact that he brought some of that critique to the table. Richard Cantu has done a good job on the Harris County Department of Education in general. That department has always been under threat of anti-education partisans. When it's actually great, it's a great department. It brings critical programs to the city. It does good work. It's very pro-social. It's a very good. It's probably the most functioning body of government, maybe in the whole state of Texas. So he's done a good job there. There's some things I disagree with him on. He wants to heavily increase the police presence in schools, and the data has not borne out on that. But in general, I think that Donnell and Richard are reasonable choices. And like I said, I think I have a lot of respect for Ethan as well.
So in effect, you're waiting for the runoff to see what you really got to do.
Well, it's a harder decision because both of them have pros and cons, right? When it comes to from where I'm sitting, from what I care about.
I got you. At large 4.
At large 4 is Letitia Plummer walking away easy. It's arguable that there's a one-person progressive bloc in city council, and it's Letitia Plummer. But even let's not even talk ideologically speaking. Letitia looks at the data. She voted for shot spotter. She looked at it. It came in. People say, you voted for it before you voted against it about issues with politicians all the time. But sometimes you get something that comes in I mean, we knew ShotSpotter was going to be a bad idea from the beginning, but I understand why politicians who have, 50 different issues coming at them at any given time might not know one way or the other. So if somebody looks at the data and says, well, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, and decides to tilt against something or in favor of something based on what the results of the actual policy are, I respect that. But beyond that, she's the only one who's challenged the police budgets. She's the only one that stood with the firefighters over arbitration. She's the only person who's actually fought on housing issues really heavily. And she's fought for this apartment inspection program over the last few years. And
recently, it seems like she got into a little tizzy with the mayor with regards to the funding, I believe, for the moving those people that live in Cancer Alley, I think in what was that all about?
So I don't know. I'm not informed specifically on the scuffle between Councilmember Plummer and the mayor on that. But what I will say is the people in the cancer cluster are not, when the mayor says we need to pay for them to move, not everybody wants to move. There were a lot of people making the case that it actually can be environmentally cleaned up, and that it could be of reasonable price to do, but it would take public money. And the city at the end of the day decided that they didn't want to go that route. So not everybody is in agreement over there. I think the sickest and saddest thing about that, and I'm so glad you brought it up, is just Union Pacific is getting away with hurting people. It's getting away with causing cancer to people. It's getting away with causing people, I have a friend that lives over there, or lived over there. She's moved away since, but, half her body sometimes will go into paralysis. She lost her parents long before she should have lost them. And it's horrible. It's a horrific, environmental racism that took place over there. And I mean, that's the right word for it. There were 3 historic Houston Black communities where this took place. And Union Pacific, meanwhile, is funding campaigns of locals. Whenever they get criticized, it's over things like stopped trains, not creosote in the soil. And it's sick. When they throw these galas and, they talk about how they're funding 30 nonprofits in the city of Houston, and all these different city councilors and, local politicians show up to stand with Union Pacific because they're doing such good for the community. I mean, that is just straight up astroturfing propaganda, period, the end.
When we talk about not only corporate greed, but corporations getting away with things, and people talk about why are progressives anti-corporations, which we're not. We're anti-bad corporations. This is a good example. When we talk about socializing the profits and rather not so socializing the debt and what's the phrase?
Privatize the gains and socialize the losses. Yeah.
Now, this is a classic example. These guys completely polluted the environment, and we're talking about public sector cleaning it up. I'm very, very sorry. That is something that the company should have been responsible for cleaning up. You make the mess, you clean it up, you cause harm to people, you pay for that harm as best you can. Okay. At large 5, I noticed you abstain, and we're going to have to kind of speed up a bit. So I'm going to leave your abstention and go to controller.
Yeah, I'm going with Chris Hollins. I think Shannon Nobles, has a lot of extensive experience in the position, but there's a lot about the status quo I don't like to see at City Hall. People point out that Hollins doesn't have as much experience as she does, and that's correct. But he does have experience managing finances, and the other thing is he didn't have any experience as clerk. And he was a great clerk. He was an awesome clerk. He was the best clerk we probably ever had in the city. And the best one we had to have during a pandemic, because he sure allowed people to have ingenious ways of voting, right? He did. And there were a lot of people who brought a politician's job, an elected employee's job, is not to be like people talk about CEOs being innovators. Their job is not to be an innovator. Their job is to find the best ideas and implement the best ideas. So when someone like Ben Chow says, we need to do drive-through voting, it's Chris Holland's job as the clerk to say, yes, we do, and then make sure that idea gets implemented. They both did their job. And that's true of every idea that was brought to the table. 24-hour voting was a great idea. Extended voting hours is a great idea. We had great turnout. We had a smooth election during a pandemic. So, I mean, it was despite the claims of propagandists, that was an excellently run election. They did take more funding to do it, but they were smart enough to have the foresight that it was going to take more funding to do that during a pandemic. And he got the job done. I'm very impressed with what he did. I'll say this in the same breath. Orlando Sanchez is a disaster. He's always been a disaster. He's always been a flunky. He's always been a corporate-owned lobbyist flunky. Dave Martin is a Republican and is probably the biggest indictment on the entire career of Sylvester Turner, that Dave Martin was made the mayoral pro tem under Turner, and that Turner is now and David Robinson are now supporting Dave Martin for controller. I think it's a tragedy. I think that they deserve lots of critique for that, and I wanted to make sure to state that before we got off the controller's race.
All right, last one. Sheila Jackson Lee for mayor.
Well, John Whitmire is a disaster, and there's things about Sheila I agree with, and things about Sheila that I disagree with. But what I do know is the biggest threat to the city of Houston's sovereignty right now, and Harris County sovereignty, is coming from the state of Texas. And we deserve the right to self-rule and home rule and self-determination, and we don't need people coming in and telling us where we can draw our lines. Sheila Jackson Lee is going to be the best bulwark against that. Period. The end.
I mean, that sounds like it. Okay, folks, 713-526-5738. We don't have much time, but if you want to give us a call, 713-526-5738. Now, I when I saw this stuff, I said, you know what? I need to get you to come on here, because a few days ago, a caller said, hey, there's this big election happening in Houston. You guys are our local station, and you hadn't covered the particular election, to which I said to the listener, you know what, man? You're absolutely right. And when you wrote this paper, I said, let me go ahead and get Daniel in here to talk a whole lot about this. Folks, give us a call, 713-526-5738, extension number 2. You'll get on air right away. Jack will talk to you and put you on right away. 713-526-5738, extension number 2. I await your calls. We have a few minutes that we can take the calls. Una vez más, 713-526-5738, extension number 2. I'm glad that you're able to cover this, Daniel. I mean, I think that the election, while very few people are hearing about it, very few people are going to vote, there's one person that's on air almost 24/7, and that is Whitmire. He has a whole lot of money in the bank. And do you think I don't think television commercials work as they did in the past. I think there's a lot more underground that occurs. I think the reason why you see Donald Trump overperforming in the polls right now has very little to do with what's on air, but everything to do that with the Republican Party nurturing their own form of media, nurturing their own clubs and institutions, things that the Democratic Party has refused to do, as they put all their money into high-priced consultants. Your thoughts?
I think that the TV is important because of the crime the crime narrative. Is impactful with older voters. But I think everything you said is correct. I think that there is a huge movement, that people are overlooking. People don't understand these Twitch streamers are moving thousands and millions of people
exactly.
at a time. And they're not paying attention to that.
That's what, and who sees that are the Republican folks are using all these avenues, investing money in it, but we don't have the Democratic Party doing that. Come on in, Tag.
Yeah, good morning, Egberto. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. Tag, talk to me, my brother.
Yeah, I just think that, when we're talking about elections and the way some people do their governance, we don't need to look any further than what's going on in Israel right now with the right-wing nationalists and what happens when that gets played out too far and they start trying to neuter the Supreme Court, for example. You have people revolt. So I think that we need to be very careful about having right-wing nationalists in our leading our country. So that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, my brother Tag. Give me your thoughts on that to close out for me, Daniel.
Heg's right. Bibi Netanyahu is a monster. It's very clear. You can say that in the same breath and still even criticize Hamas for everything that's happened and condemn that. But yeah, of course, the right wing nationalists in Israel have caused all kinds of massive chaos and violence, and of course they will here too.
I stayed away from the Israel subject as best I could on my show yesterday because, again, it is very touchy. But I'm glad you came on and said exactly what you said. You can come out and say what Netanyahu has been doing is criminal, and what Hamas has done has been horrendous. We don't need innocent people dead on either side of the border, and you have people living in the turmoil that they're living in the West Bank and Gaza. That presents a problem. That has nothing to do with Jewishness or any of that sort. Your thoughts?
I completely agree. We didn't mention, I do want to give one quick shout out. Travis McGee for District D is one of the most active advocates in the city of Houston. He single-handedly, well, not quite single-handedly, but with very few people, beat back a dump in his community twice. And there's now a community center there where they thought they were going to put a dump. He's one of the most active people in HISD advocacy. And I just wanted to make sure to get that in there. Travis McGee for District D may very well be the best person on the ballot this year.
Thank you for bringing that up. Of course, that is above my pay grade. I mean, you can't know all these people that are running, but again, that's why we have a lot of good folks like you with newsletters and all of that to keep us informed with what's going on. But anyhow, let me go and throw this to our geniuses in the studio. Howard, come on in.
Alrighty then, another fine show there, Egberto. Good luck on all the candidates who are going to run for mayor. It's going to be quite an interesting race. And that's about all I got. Jack, what's your wisdom today?
Well, first off, the election's coming up. Educate yourself on the issues. Get registered. Check your registration, because some people may get bumped off the roll. So check your registration and show up and vote.
Vote.
Today's the last day to register, as I recall. Right. Listen to Howard. Vote. Daniel, thank you so kindly for being with us. Give me a 10-second closer.
Yeah, if you get involved, make sure that you vote, make sure that you take action. And if you don't know how, then check us out at indivisiblehouston.com. That's indivisible, like one nation, indivisible Houston, like this wonderful city we live in.com.
And give us your newsletter. I want people to sign up for your newsletter.
Yes, thank you. DanielJCohen.substack.com. That's Disruption and Democracy with Daniel J. Cohen. DanielJCohen.substack.com.
I want everybody to be informed, folks. My name is Egberto Willies. I want to thank Howard, Jack, and Daniel, and our callers. My name is Egberto Willies. This is Politics Done Right, and you guys know how I end this baby. I am out.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number 1, subscribe to our channel. And number 2, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.